Hey everybody, I wanted to make a short little video explaining the histogram. The histogram is a super useful tool that's always available to you in Lightroom. It's always in the top right corner up here. It's available in both the library and the develop modules. You also can usually turn a histogram on your camera. I think that's really useful. I have a Canon here in my studio, and if I just hit the info button, the display scrolls through different options, and one of them has a histogram. You might not be able to see it in this video, but you're just going to have to trust me. There's a histogram displayed right there. And I'll explain to you why that's useful. So, when we're looking at the histogram, we have information plotted out in a graph. And that information is the tonality values of what is inside of your image. I know that's a little confusing. So right now I have this one photo right here selected. This is a really dark, underexposed photo. It's really dark. It didn't get enough light. And this is what the histogram is showing us, right? Over here in the far left is the numerical value of 0. The numerical value of 0 in photography, in digital photography, equals absolute black with no detail. On the far right, we have the numerical value of 255. 255 represents absolute white with no detail. So on the far right, we have absolute white. On the far left, we have absolute black. And then we have every tone in between. Well, we see that this photo that I have selected, it has a lot of blacks and, a lot of shadow area, all the way down to kind of mid-tones, and then it kind of ends. There's nothing white in this photo. There's no highlights in this photo. And so there's no information over here. So I'm going to just click over to the develop module really quick and kind of show you how this information plots out. So let me click off these warnings here. So here's that photo, super dark. And if I float my cursor over the histogram in the develop module, you can see where this information is plotted out. So if I have my cursor floated over the far left, you see underneath the histogram, it says blacks. Those are your darkest values in your photograph. That's where they live on this graph. If I go next to it, that's shadows. Shadows are the dark parts of your photographs, but not the absolute blacks. If I go to the middle, Lightroom calls it exposure. I would call it your midtones. So exposure and midtones can be used interchangeably. If I go farther right, we have highlights. Highlights are the light parts of your photos that aren't absolute white. We see that in this example, there are no highlights. And if I go even further right, we have whites. Whites is your 255, absolute white, no detail. Also, we don't have any of those in our photos, or in this photo. So let me scroll over to the next photo here, which is a better exposure, and we see that now our histogram represents that better exposure. We have way more information spread out across this histogram. The way that I want you guys to think about your histogram is, I always use the analogy that it's like, the histogram is going grocery shopping. So when you're shooting in RAW, you want to make sure that you get as much information inside the rectangle of this histogram as you possibly can. What you don't want is what's happening in this photo. This photo is what we would call clipped. This is a clipped exposure, which means it's an underexposed photo, right? So this photo and this photo were taken in the same place, but this photo, my camera settings were set in a way that I actually captured the information, and this one, it was set in a way that it didn't capture the information because the exposure was either not long enough or my aperture was stepped down too far. So it's not that the lighting changed between these two photos, it's that my camera settings changed. So in this photo, I'm missing a bunch of information. That information lives over here. It's clipped out of the histogram. It's not that it didn't exist in the scene, it's that my camera, the way that I had it set up in manual settings, it didn't capture it. So this is like going grocery shopping to make a big dinner and forgetting to buy half of the things that you needed. Where, if we have a histogram that is like this, all of the stuff that we need is actually in the cart. So don't get bogged down in what I'm doing in Lightroom right now. Just really think about that histogram. So I'm going to take the exposure and just push it all the way over here. Now we have a really underexposed image, and we have clipping in the shadows. So this is called clipping in the shadows. If I was to take the exposure and push it all the way this way, now we have clippings in the highlights. Information is being clipped out of the histogram. What happens when we clip that information out is it's no longer available to us to edit. We have whites with no detail. No matter how we edit this photo from this point forward, we would never get that detail back. So it's really, really critical to get as much of this information in your histogram as you possibly can. And you want to spread it across the histogram. You want this mountain range to exist in the histogram, and you want the valleys to live within the boundaries of the histogram. So we see that right now the histogram goes all the way down to black with no clipping, and over here it goes all the way to white with no clipping. That's what we want. That's a proper exposure. Where if we go over here, we have clipping, 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 clipping. Oh, now we don't have clipping. But if we scroll this way, we start getting clipping. So Lightroom has a really, really useful tool for this. It's called the clipping masks. So the clipping masks are these little triangles up here in the develop module. So if I select those, they will be outlined in white. And the clipping mask over here is for blacks. The clipping mask over here is for highlights. Now, when we show clipping mask, it's not changing your photo. It's just showing you what is being clipped. So if I scroll over here, you're going to start seeing these red pixels pop up. This isn't red added into your image. It's just a mask over the top of your image that's saying, hey, all of these red pixels are now white with no detail. You've clipped the information out of these pixels. So now if I bring the exposure all the way over here, you're going to see these blue pixels pop up. That means these are all black with no detail. Everything in here still has detail because it doesn't have that blue over the top of it. But everything down here is black with no detail. Now if I was to take the shadows and bring that down, I'd lose even more. Black, even more. Now our photo has absolute no detail. It's just black. So that is a really useful tool. I always have the clipping masks turned on. Let's go look at I'm going to go back to the library module and pick a more evenly exposed photograph for us to kind of look at the clipping mask. Let's look at this one. Okay, I'm going to go into the develop module with this photo. So this photo is going to have a pretty normal histogram on it because we have a pretty nice range of shadows, of blacks, shadows, midtones, highlights, all that stuff. So right here is a really nice histogram. We went grocery shopping and all of our materials are in here. Now, if you were to, if I was to, in the camera, underexpose this photo a little bit, something like here, or even we can go down to like this, I could still use this photo. So we have this exposure dial down here, and I'm going to explain how to use this a little bit better when we talk about global edits in the develop module. So don't worry about that right now, but there's a lot of recovery that we can do if we record our images in RAW. Okay, this is only available if you record your images in RAW. If you take a photo with a bad histogram with clipped information and it's a JPEG, that information is gone. There's nothing you can do to get it back. So that's one of the reasons why we're definitely shooting in RAW. So, really quick, let me just bring this back. You can dial it in. So, a kind of rule that we want in our photographs, and I like to give these rules just so you have an understanding, but it's not, this isn't hard and fast and you always need to stick with them. You just have to understand that you need to show me in an intro-level class that you understand the concepts, and then later you can break those concepts. So, a rule that I'm going to share with you is we always want there to be an absolute black in our photograph. Okay, we want there to be somewhere in the photo that's an absolute black. Now, if we look at this photograph, how it is right now, if I zoom in right here, we do have absolute black. Look at those little clipping areas. But those little blue areas down here are the only places where there's absolute black. We do not want there to be absolute white in the photograph. We want there to be a near absolute white. So, let me just really quick explain to you why. So, if I was to record this photograph and it looked like this, and then I went and took this photo and edited it some more and put it on Instagram, where maybe the background of Instagram, the platform, is white, these areas of highlight clipping would blend in with that white border. Or, if I was to print this photo on a white piece of paper, our photo would no longer be a rectangle. It would be this weird amorphous blob because these areas would bleed into the white border. So we always want there to be some type of light tonality in the image that separates the highlights in the image from the white background of a website, Instagram, or a piece of paper. So, to recap that, we always want there to be an absolute black. We don't always want there to be an absolute white. So, an exposure like this, where we have these couple little spots of absolute black, is totally perfect. We do not have any absolute white in this photo because there's no red pixels highlighted anywhere in it. So that's a brief description of the histogram. It's super useful. If you have a histogram screen that you can enable on your camera, I would highly recommend doing that. I actually never even use a light meter in my camera. I just have the histogram always displayed. So I use the histogram as my light meter in my camera. So I can post some links to how to turn a histogram feature on Canons, Nikons, and Sony cameras. If you have something other than those, you might want to, just do a quick Google search, histogram preview on my camera, and see if you can figure out how to turn it on. It's not crucial, but it is a helpful tool. Okay, bye.